Well, thanks once again for taking the time to tune in to my YouTube channel. Now, I have posted a couple of videos of these particular machines on my channel before, but I thought I would take this opportunity to give you a little more background and information on this very unique collection of Cecil Pearson JAP Scramblers. Now, John Alfred Prestwich, JAP, of course, started out by building movie projectors for the cinema industry in the early 1900s, until he then put his engineering skills to good use by building these fantastic 4-stroke JAP motors. Now, I asked Cecil what made him decide to build these machines, and he told me that when he was a racer there was not a lot of choice about in terms of bikes if he wanted to take up the sport of motorcycle scrambling. He said there just never seemed to be many bikes you could buy straight off the shelf as a race ready bike, although for some reason there was always plenty of these old 1930s JAP motors lying around, he said. So I got straight to work and fitted one into a Rickman frame, and I was just about good to go. Now, after Cecil had completed the very first bike and began racing it on the racetrack, he said he never had much success on the racing circuit riding this first bike, although he did have a few decent results. But victories were never important to me, said Cecil. It was riding the bike that I enjoyed, especially the smooth delivery of power from that torquey, long-stroking JAP engine. In fact, I liked my first machine that much that I decided I wanted to build another, and so that is how this fantastic gathering of bikes began. Now, this assortment of bikes are mainly made up of 600cc single-cylinder JAP motors, which are bolted on to those superb 1960s British-made Rickman frames. Now, all the bikes have 4-speed Norton AMC gearboxes, but mind you, with a massive torque available from these engines, who needs a gearbox? All you really need is one gear for getting off the start line and then another for on the open track. Now, of course, Cecil hasn't raced competitively since retiring in 1968, although he still slings his leg over these machines occasionally at classic and twin shock events. But nowadays Cecil gets most of his enjoyment from seeing his bikes raced on the track by other riders. Now, that's one of the reasons that he formed his own race team called JAP Racing, which consists of himself, John Griffiths, Peter Turtle, Stephen Shields and Tom Stanich. Now, all these guys have no fear at all when it comes to throwing their legs over these methanol breathing mechanical monsters. Now, naturally, these old machines don't run on regular gas. You have to run these things on methanol because it makes the cylinders run a lot cooler and increases the compression, which of course means more power. Now, of course, the engineering for these engines comes straight from the 1930s, and I was asking Cecil what they were like maintenance-wise to work on, but he said they were pretty straightforward to work on, and there are never really any major problems when it comes to stripping or rebuilding the motors. Although the engines, he told me, were originally built using aluminium conrods as a weight saver, but these naturally would break if you didn't change them on a regular basis. But he says he has now converted the whole of his fleet to steel conrods, so thankfully they last that little bit longer. Now, most of the engineering work on these machines are undertaken by Cecil himself, because as a younger lad he was employed as a diesel mechanic and engineer, which of course stood him in good stead and helped him find his way around how these internal combustion engines work. But when it comes to spare parts, Cecil said he still surfs the internet for bits and pieces, and what he can't find he tries to refabricate himself to keep the bikes on the track. Besides, he said, if I get stuck, I can always fall back on my old mate Ewan Cameron at Cameron Engineering in Malvern, Worcestershire, in the UK. Now, Ewan Cameron's engineering shop actually builds from bare metal a V-twin version of this JAP motor for the famous Morgan three-wheeler motor car. They also manufacture almost every other part that Cecil needs to keep these bikes on the track. So what I don't find second hand, I just get Ewan to make for me, said Cecil, and it usually arrives within a few days of placing an order. Now, of course, no sump on these engines to contain engine oil. These 600cc JAP motors work on what is called a total loss oil lubrication system, whereby the frame contains the engine oil and you fill that up just before a race event, and then the external pump pumps the oil around the engine and onto the track. Of course, all of these old JAP motors were fitted with dry clutches, so they don't take too kindly to someone holding in the clutch for long periods, as they tend to overheat ever so slightly. Now, of course, these long stroking single cylinder JAP motors were widely used to great success in the 1960s and 70s, when nearly all speedway bikes at the time in some form or another used these John Alfred Prestwich motors in their chassis. These were ideally suited, of course, for this kind of sport with their long stroking torquey 600cc engines. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Cecil uses rock shocks on the rear of all his machines, which he has done for many years now, and thinks that these rock shocks are ideally suited for these old classic Scramblers. Now, these JAP motors were not only used to power motorcycles. A derivative of these engines were also used to power what was termed at the time the very first all-British aircraft, the 1909 Avro triplane. Now, Prestwich also made engines for a variety of other uses, including garden rotavators, generators, farm milking machines, water pumps, and even lawnmowers. Now, Prestwich was indeed a man of many talents. Now, of course, there will be other JAP enthusiasts out there who will undoubtedly have an old Prestwich motorcycle or two lying about in their classic bike collection, although I'd like to think that there will not be many of them who will have such a unique collection as this particular compendium from Cecil Pearson. Now, all of these machines have to be testament to John Alfred Prestwich's engineering skills, and of course to Cecil Pearson, who maintains and keeps these unique and fantastically engineered bikes on the racetrack where they belong. Now, Cecil told me that he will never retire these bikes and use them as museum pieces. As long as he is still able, he will beg, steal, borrow, buy, or even manufacture parts to keep these machines racing on the track, and to keep alive the name of one of Britain's greatest mechanical engineers, John Alfred Prestwich. Okay, we've seen the bikes close up and talked about them. Let's just see what they actually sound like on the racetrack.